Hello and welcome to the first bonus video in the 20 years of MCF celebration. I'm MCFPapa. This is the first part of my 6-part retrospective where I go through each of the eras of the Mystery Case Files series, and I'll analyze all of the games and how the series progresses. These eras aren't anything official, they're just how I personally classify the games of the series due to how each one has its own unique characteristics. For this video, I'm going to cover the Classic Era of MCF. These games were the first entries in the series, and the defining aspect of these games is the high emphasis they put on hidden object scenes. The series began on a fateful day in November almost 20 years ago from when I'm uploading this with Mystery Case Files Huntsville. My first exposure to the game was when I got the disc version of Hidden Expedition Titanic for my birthday. Do you remember when PC games had actual discs they came on? And while I loved Titanic a ton, 2 of the demos included on the disc were even more captivating. There was a demo for Huntsville, and there was a demo for Prime Suspects. Basically an early version of what Big Fish still does to this day, letting you play a game freely for an hour before you need to buy it. I played the Prime Suspects demo first, and I liked it a whole lot more than the Huntsville demo. So when it was time for a trip to Walmart and I saw the 2 games there, I begged my parents for Prime Suspects. And so I played the heck out of that game for months. But of course I knew back then even that MCF wasn't just one game, there were 2. So then I begged my parents for Huntsville and I played the heck out of it too. Not quite as much as I did Prime Suspects, but still a ton. I remember it was installed on my parents' upstairs desktop, and one time I was playing it even when there is a terrible storm raging outside. Now, probably the last place you want to be when there's thunder and lightning and a tornado warning in effect is alone on the 2nd floor of an old farmhouse next to a large window. But that's how important MCF was to me as a child. It took my dad specifically telling me to stop and come downstairs for me to finally shut it down. I was so invested in Huntsville that if he hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't have come down until I could see a tornado out the window. That might have finally convinced me to go down myself. Huntsville's a very interesting game, especially given other games in the series. In other games we were the master detective, but here at Huntsville we're just a rookie at the MCF agency and need to work our way up the ranks. It's interesting that the game designers had us go through the ranks so fast, getting promoted after every single level in the game. I know that it's really because the devs wanted there to be a fun little reward for beating the levels, but it does have some cool, larger lore implications. Given how fast the Master Detective earns his rank, it makes perfect sense why he's so respected and always is the first one the MCF agency sends out on cases throughout the whole series. I should note though that for this whole retrospective parts, I'll be referring to the Master Detective as a man. This is because the Master Detective is meant to be you, literally you as in whoever is playing the game. And so since I'm a guy, to me the Master Detective is as well. Something I love about Huntsville is its colorful cast of characters. Each of the villains has their own unique design, and many have some humor in the end of level reveal where they get busted, such as the wackiness of Elmer climbing down the fire pole in the beaver costume. I love the more morbid humor the game has too, like how the items we see in the pawn shop were stolen out of dead people's graves, or how Ty is for some reason turning cats into clocks. Seriously, what the heck does that accomplish? I don't know, but he does it. I remember seeing some comments over the years that the game is meant to be Huntsville, Alabama. But given the Huntsville in this game has a population of 357, while the Alabama city had between 158,216 and 180,105 people living there in 2005, I think it's safe to say it's not meant to be Huntsville, Alabama. The U.S. city with the population closest to the in-game number is Huntsville, Ohio, which had 454 to 431 people in 2005. That town's biggest claim to fame is that it's the birthplace of Lillian Brown, a woman who provided makeup and image consulting services to every U.S. president from Eisenhower to Clinton, as well as to Martin Luther King Jr. and Walter Cronkite. Plus, she managed to live to age 106. I just think it's neat that someone from a small town could impact so many famous people over the course of their life. But it's way too early in this retrospective for me to be getting off track. I don't think it was meant for Huntsville to be based on any real place. It's called Huntsville because it's a funny pun, given it's a hidden object game. The setting seems to be just more of your stereotypical small town, the type of place where people are really close to each other, and you couldn't go anywhere in town without running into someone you recognize. And they actually show this aspect masterfully in the game, where many of the criminals have connections to the various locations. Rudy the town barber is from Rudy's Barber Shop. Who'da thunk? The grave robber is Pawn Shop's Pete assistant Lou. And so I think this helps give them a sense of familiarity and helps the town to feel more lived in and interconnected. Because from then on, when you visit those locations for hidden object scenes, you have a person to associate with the scene. For instance, Slick Rick, the chemical dumper, is from the body shop, so now you can associate both the body shop and the nautical museum with him. And I think it's a good moral to teach within the game. When you're driving through a small town, don't just pass it by in a hurry to get to your next big city destination. Stop in at some of the shops, chat with the locals, form some new memories and maybe even some new friends. And who knows, there might be a whole criminal cabal plaguing the town that you could expose through your investigative prowess. You never know. The game's story is you investigating various random crimes around town, simple and laid back, but then at the end it's revealed that everyone is part of the Stain organization and connected to each other. Each character has a Stain emblem near them, showing that they're all part of the larger group. And you can even see this emblem in the case report photo for all the cases you've solved, though it bugs me a bit you don't see it for the photo of Elmer because his emblem was further away in the artwork. It's understandable how Rudy counterfeiting money or Slick Rick polluting the waters fulfill the group's overall goal to cause trouble in Huntsville, and even, I guess, stuff like Lou desecrating people's graves or Doris Blevins faking UFO sightings help spread panic and fear among the residents. But I really don't understand how much harm Bill Larson does. It might not be exactly healthy to eat at a diner so often that your wife thinks you're cheating on her, but it's not a criminal action. Maybe he's done other crimes we never learn about in-game, or maybe he just thought Stain was some sort of cool club and wanted to fit in. Who knows? And something else weird about Stain is that it seems to be an acronym, yet they never reveal what it stands for in the game, and for that matter, it hasn't been revealed at all in the whole 20-year history of the MCF series. So I guess you can just make up anything you want. Maybe it's slightly treacherous agency of infamous ne'er-do-wells, or perhaps the society of taboo, abhorrent, and infamous notions. Or maybe it's super trashy alligators inside nightclubs. Who knows? All three of those are equally valid. But my favorite thing about Stain is the identity of its criminal mastermind. You expect it to be some shady evil figure, and then it turns out to be the grandmother Gertrude Goodwittle. It's a funny subversion, and she's apparently so evil she has to knit a scarf with the Stain emblem on it. In a more serious sort of game, this would be a terrible ending and disappoint many players. Like, imagine if you were playing Portal and then Gladys turned out to be just a grandmother, but she was still supposed to be a big threat. But since this is a more casual, laid-back sort of game with a lot of fairly silly moments, this ending fits perfect for it. And going back to Huntsville, it's interesting just how much stricter it is than even the other Classic Era games. The time limits are far less generous in this game, especially for any newcomers who are playing the game for the first time. This culminates in the final level where you're tasked to find all 8 items in a brand new hidden object scene not seen before, plus do the usual tile puzzle at the end, all within 4 minutes. This was incredibly difficult for younger me, and it took me quite a few attempts of playing the game before I was familiar enough with the final level to be able to beat it the first try. I suppose the rationale for such a short amount of time is that the big boss is onto the master detective's investigation and they're gonna escape if we don't hurry. And even though this final level is kinda tough, it's also very fitting as a final exam of your hidden object skills acquired over the course of the game if you're able to beat it. And it makes sense that because we managed to apprehend the big boss in such a short amount of time, that the MCF agency would grant us the rank of Master Detective for it. Above all else, Huntsville is a hidden object game. Each of its scenes are jam-packed with tons of potential items to find, and even when several scenes will show up 5 or more times over the course of the game, the randomized item lists help them from feeling too easy or samey when you revisit them. Since each playthrough of this game is unique, it encourages you to replay it over and over again. And their selection of locations really helps sell the game's small town vibe too, with many feeling like small-sized buildings themselves, like a cozy little bookstore or a barber shop that only has one barber chair. And they tried to design these scenes with a timeless look where many feel like they could fit in just as well in 1975 as they do in 2005. You don't really see much 2005 tech in the game. The only real contemporary for 2005 item is the computer that Eugene Needlemeyer uses. But this also helps make Huntsville feel like more of a small town, where it's not in a technological rush to get the big new fancy schmancy gadgets like the big cities, and so a lot of more old-fashioned tech continues to be utilized a lot longer in these sorts of places. And even though later MCF games would have a ton of puzzles in them, Huntsville really only has one, the tile matching puzzle to recreate the image at the end of each level. The rationale is your trusty crime computer is able to generate a reconstruction of the crime scene due to all the items you find, and you need to piece it together. I do like the joke that the crime computer is apparently a top-of-the-line analysis machine capable of, doing this recreation, but it has a very haphazard and cobbled-together look with a old typewriter keyboard on it. It seems like the MCF agency didn't have that big of a budget at this time, or at the very least didn't want to spend a ton of money on the new rookie. Now, before I finish this Huntsville section, I want to mention Mystery Case Files Detective Training. This game came out a few years after Huntsville, sometime after the release of Madame Fate. But this isn't a unique entry in the series, but a modified version of Huntsville. It cuts out levels 5 through 10, and you go right from level 4 Loose Nut to level 11 from Huntsville Confidence Man. It also cuts out 6 locations from the game, and some other locations were shifted around as well. For example, in level 2 of the real Huntsville, you visit Ty's Clock Shop, but since that scene is cut out from Detective Training, instead you visit the Captain's Inn on that level. There are generally fewer scenes in this game's levels as well. For example, in Huntsville's level 15, there are 10 locations to visit, but in Detective Training's final level, there's only 7. But by far the most confusing aspect of this game is that it's still sold to this day by Big Fish on their website, and it costs $10, the same exact price as Huntsville. So why would anyone pay the same price for a more incomplete version of the game? The only thing I could maybe think of is that the game's meant to be easier for players so that new players can have a better experience playing it for the first time. But even though original Huntsville might be kinda tough for new people, it's not exactly that difficult. And if you run out of time, all you need to do is do the level over again, and you keep trying and trying, and eventually you'll manage to beat it. But if they really wanted to make Huntsville easier, why not just patch the game instead of making a whole separate entry? I don't know, maybe back in 2008 when Detective Training released, Big Fish didn't know how to digitally patch games themselves? I'm not sure. I guess if you really, really love Huntsville, there's some fun to get out of Detective Training as an alternate version, but it's really not worth it for 99% of people. In my closing thoughts for Huntsville, it's very impressive that such a small dev team of only 8 people were able to create such an excellent first entry of what would go on to become an excellent series. If Huntsville wasn't as well crafted, then there never would have been a full-time MCF series that's endured for 20 years, 4 different studios, 28 mainline PC games and counting, 5 spin-off games, 4 novels, and who knows how much longer the series will go on. It has no signs of slowing down anytime soon. Huntsville was a massive smash hit, and so they soon made a sequel in Prime Suspects. Like I said, I first found Prime Suspects from the demo included in Hidden Expedition Titanic's disc. And so Prime Suspects was the very first game in the MCF series I played at all. And I found it much more appealing than Huntsville, probably because the game's a lot more in your face with its characters. Huntsville had plenty of wacky characters, but you only saw them at the end of each level. Whereas in Prime Suspects, you get a full-on description of each suspect to start the level, as well as see them at the end. And there's some really funny stuff in these intro descriptions. I love jokes like Abe Stinkin' forgetting to cut holes in his garbage bag mask, or Susan Williams making a living selling bootleg Girl Scout cookies. They really dialed up the humor for this game, and it works really well and adds to the fun factor. Prime Suspects does pretty much everything that a sequel should. It takes what made the first game great and massively builds and improves on its foundations. Huntsville only had 15 levels, 16 if you count the short big boss level, whereas Prime Suspects has 21 full-size levels, 22 if you count just the gem box final level. Huntsville just had one tile matching puzzle for the whole game, but Prime Suspects cycles through the tile puzzle, a memory puzzle, and a word search puzzle, which helps to make the end of each level feel more fresh. Plus then, at the very end of the game, there's the gem box opening puzzle, which is unique to the end. In order for the hidden object scenes to have more variety, they put in many scenes where you'd need to use either a flashlight or a scano ray to see inside them. It isn't much, but it does add some nice variety since you can only see a small circle of the scene in these locations. Plus, it's fun that there's a battery to find randomly hidden within one of the other locations, giving you an extra item to search for. And since the battery location is randomized, it means it's something that doesn't feel too samey, even though you gotta collect several batteries over the course of the game. Well, at least on your first playthrough it doesn't feel too samey. After playing the game a few times, you're likely to have many of the common locations memorized. Like, even as I wrote out this script after not touching Prime Suspects for months, I can still remember that Madame Ball palm reader has the battery on one of the chairs, and in the produce stand scene it's in the coin purse. And because of the battery, the in-game locations always show up on the map so that a player doesn't accidentally finish a room without collecting the battery and get soft-locked. But ever since I was young, it's always bugged me that the scenes don't despawn from the map at all, like they do in Huntsville, Ravenhearst, and Madame Fate. But what this game does the strongest is how it randomizes so much more elements than any other entry in the series. There's the usual randomization where each hidden object scene has dozens of potential items to find. But then there's also the order of suspects you visit. All 20 of them can show up in any order. And then there's also who is a prime suspect. Any 4 of the first 19 suspects have a chance to be a prime suspect, with the person you investigate on level 20 always being guaranteed to be the 5th prime suspect. And then there's the randomization of which of the 5 prime suspects turn out to be the guilty party who stole the gem. And as if that's not enough, the levels themselves have a decent amount of randomization with which locations you visit. For example, on level 4, you're always guaranteed to visit the produce stand and Capital City Station. However, the game will also randomly choose 2 scenes from Tweedle's Dolls, the Auto Salvage, the Carousel, or the City Park, and also spawn them in the level. And for each suspect, they gave them a corresponding location, so you'll always visit that suspect's location on the level in which you investigate them. However, if their location was already meant to appear, then you get lucky and have 1 fewer scene to visit in the level as a bonus. It's easiest to demonstrate on level 1, where for most of the suspects you have to visit 3 locations: Capital City Station, Abe's Red Hots, and whatever the suspect's signature location is. However, if you're investigating Holiday Inn or Abe's Stinkin' on that first level, then you'll only need to visit the 2 locations. I love the effort they put in to make a unique second character artwork for every single one of the suspects of them looking happy and holding the Hope Diamond. A player only has a 5% chance of seeing a specific character's ending image each playthrough, since only one of the 20 can ever be the guilty party. This means at minimum you would need to play 20 games of Prime Suspects to see all the endings naturally in the game, but realistically you would need a whole lot more playthroughs before managing to get all 20 of them. Or I guess you could just watch this retrospective, since I'm showing all of them off here right now. So you could do that too. An interesting change in Prime Suspects is how they designed the hidden object scenes in terms of their aesthetics. In Huntsville, the scenes were almost always indoors. In the rare case there was a window, such as in Rudy's barber shop, you can't really see outside very well. And even in the graveyard, which is entirely outdoors, the fog and the trees block you from seeing anything. And so this helps create a sense of claustrophobia and once again boost its small town vibes. However, Prime Suspects really nicely contrasts this, where Capital City is meant to be a giant bustling metropolis. And so the locations in Prime Suspects feel a lot larger and more open. In many of them you can see distant skyscrapers or other buildings in the distance. They added background audio to every hidden object scene besides just the music. So now you hear the noise of people and cars in scenes like Abe's Red Hots and the produce stand, making it seem more lived in. The title screen even uses a bunch of lit up skyscrapers and spotlights to depict the city as so massive that it's all wreathed in shadow and mystery. But of course the biggest indicator that Capital City is a big city, it has a blimp flying over it on the map screen. Even though Capital City's name would imply it's supposed to be inspired by Washington, D.C., it feels a lot more inspired by New York City to me. One of the first scenes you ever visit is Abe's Red Hots, a hot dog street vendor. The city has permanent carnival rides with the Carousel and Tunnel of Terror reminiscent of Coney Island. The city park scene with various animals reminds me of Central Park and its zoo. The city has a pier, implying it does a lot of shipping by boat in and out. And of course the biggest similarity to real-life New York City is that there's only one gas station for several city blocks. Well, in Huntsville, it felt more like we were exploring every single building that the small town had, well, outside of people's residential homes. In Prime Suspects, there has to be a lot of parts of the city we aren't investigating. I joke about mixed gas being the only gas station, but there's absolutely no way a city of over 9 million people has just the one. Same as how we only visit one hotel, one pub, one bank. There must be a lot more we don't see. If we just went off what was shown in-game with buildings, then Capital City doesn't even have a working hospital, just an abandoned one. I think it's kind of funny that so much in this game is a step up from Huntsville that even the plot is a lot more higher stakes. Well, maybe not a lot more, but at least a little higher stakes. This is the first ever case we take on as Master Detective, and it's clear that we have a lot more trust and have developed a bit of a reputation for our crime solving. In Huntsville, we were solving crimes for the mayor, but in Prime Suspects, we're on the job from Supervisor, the director of the FBI. In Huntsville, we solved many small crimes, but in Prime Suspects, it's just one single, much larger crime. But one thing I've always been a bit curious about is the honorary FBI agent medal you get at the end of the game. Even back in the day, I thought it was meant to be a promotion, just like how we got the rank of Master Detective in Huntsville, so from then on, post-Prime Suspects, we would be an FBI agent going forward. But they didn't follow up on it in Ravenhearst and kept us as just the Master Detective. I guess they figured if they kept promoting us higher and higher, they'd run out of ranks, because eventually the Master Detective would be like the Supreme Commander of the universe. I don't know. But it is strange to me that they never followed up on the fact we were an honorary FBI agent. Even when games are set explicitly in the US, like 13th Skull and Shadow Lake, it's never brought up and we never ask the FBI for any assistance. I would have liked to see Supervisor reappear in other entries to help us out, kinda like how James Bond has Felix Leiter sometimes help him on his adventures. In general, barely anything from this game has reappeared in later entries. Huntsville has gotten several references to it over the years, and Gertrude Goodwittle even shows up again in Rewind. Ravenhearst and Madame Fate have gotten full sequels and tons of areas referencing them in later games, but Prime Suspects has largely been left behind. Art the Carney reappears in Madame Fate and Fate's Carnival, but that's about it. Well, I guess there was the sticker on the suitcase in Dire Grove Sacred Grove. That's a really big comeback. Like I said earlier, Prime Suspects was the first full MCF game I got. I was absolutely addicted to playing Hidden Expedition Titanic over and over again. But I became even more addicted to Prime Suspects, playing the game pretty much in all the free time I had. Getting home from school or an outing, boom, right to playing Prime Suspects. Watching stuff on TV, I had the laptop on my lap and I'm playing Prime Suspects while I'm watching. Done brushing my teeth and taking a bath for bedtime, I'm trying to squeeze in another level or two on the computer before my parents tell me to go to sleep. And just the laptop still wasn't enough for me. I would also install the game on every PC we had, so if someone was using the laptop, for example, I could use the upstairs desktop to still play it. Prime Suspects showed that MCF wasn't just a one-off, but a full-fledged series. The next entry was Ravenhearst, what I would say is the most influential game of the Classic Era. Not only did it establish several core elements that would continue throughout the series, but it also began a storyline which is by far the most popular in this series, to the point where I'd say it's been done a bit too much with entries following up on the Ravenhearst storyline. Here's a list of the MCF games which have some sort of connection to Ravenhearst. As you can see, it's quite massive. In terms of scale, Ravenhearst is actually much smaller than the other entries. Instead of a town or a big city, all you're exploring is this game is one mansion and a bit of its surrounding grounds. But this helped to give the location an identity of its own. You see, every single inch of the manor, from the cellar to the widow's walk, well, at least every inch you'd expect to find in a manor. You don't see the many underground passages which we explore in future Ravenhearst entries. The concept of a haunted mansion has been done for ages, but it works really well here. They were clearly influenced by I Spy Spooky Mansion, one of the hidden object game pioneers, and to their credit, I'd say the game's much better than Spooky Mansion, as much as I love that game. They did a great job putting more emphasis on the atmosphere this time around, though the hidden object scenes are designed to be run down and dilapidated to show the state of the mansion after over 100 years. The scenes themselves aren't ugly to look at and spend time finding objects in. In fact, some of them look really good to me, such as the Widow's Walk, the tree house, or the shed. They also really stepped up the sound design this time, with background music even having notes which sound like wolves howling in the distance or bats flying through the night. And I couldn't forget to mention that for the first time in an MCF game, there's voice lines, where we hear the ghost of Emma Ravenhearst whispering various ominous messages throughout our playtime.
This is not my home. Help me. Find the pages.
The atmosphere even extends to the map screen. While Huntsville and Prime Suspects had maps which seem cozy and laid back, Ravenhearst's map is blueprints spread out on a dark ground with occasional flashes of lightning around the edges and a flashlight flickering. Like it's all you have to light up the blueprints and its battery is about to go out and leave you in the dark. With the way the map is organized into separate floors, it seems like the master detective is planning and strategizing his trip to the mansion with each level. And I love how they put in the effort to make each floor of the mansion have its own unique layout with its rooms, with the cellar's icon even having a stairway on it, and the grounds having decorative paths showing how they all connect to each other. And I love how they made the treehouse icon shaped like a leaf. But by far the most clever feature this game added to the series are its door puzzles, where certain rooms are locked behind a complex puzzle you need to complete. With the door puzzles, each of them is totally unique from one another, which helps them to feel a lot more special than just the end of level puzzles were. And something else unique is that although a few of them were more specific puzzles, like in the parlor or the nursery where you're only really doing one thing, most of the door puzzles in this game involve some sort of Rube Goldberg contraption where you need to move various elements and combine them to progress through the puzzle. Even though I love these mid-level puzzles, there are a few issues I have with them. For the biggest is that there are 20 levels in the game, but only 15 of them have these unique puzzles. I don't know why. Maybe they were under time constraints and weren't able to design enough puzzles to fill the whole game, or maybe at one point in development there was only supposed to be 15 levels, but they expanded it to 20. Although these mid-level puzzles are great, the end-of-level puzzles are pretty weak in this game. Prime Suspects had 3 different ones for its end-of-level puzzles, but this game just has one. A jigsaw puzzle where you piece together a diary image. And while I think the sketches in Emma's diary look good, a sepia-toned image is far less interesting visually compared to the color images found in the earlier games. But to get back to positives, what I adore about the Rube Goldberg puzzles is they allow for pretty much any combination of elements and allowed for the developers to get super creative with what they have the player do. In one, you're popping a balloon to scare a dummy attached to a blowtorch. In another, you're feeding dog food to an electric hamster. In another, you're flushing a toilet to make a guy yodel up a mountain, and yet somehow all of it works, thanks to how versatile this puzzle format is. It's a shame, though, that so few entries in the series even had these sorts of Rube Goldberg puzzles, because I loved them the most conceptually. Thanks to these puzzles, the devs were able to still incorporate a bit of humor and levity into the game, even though the main story itself is fairly dark. So now would be a good time to discuss the largest aspect of this game, its story. Huntsville and Prime Suspects had pretty basic stories. They had characters, but you would learn about one character per level, and that would be pretty much it for them. Here in Ravenhearst, however, they wrote a story which is developed over the course of the whole game. And just like how a good book keeps you reading chapter to chapter, Ravenhearst is designed so you'll want to keep playing the game to get new journal pages each level. Despite the story only having a handful of characters, they're captivating enough to carry the story through the whole game. First is Emma Ravenhearst, the author of the journal pages and how we view the events of the past. Her journal entries do a good job of characterizing her as a quite well-meaning woman who is also very innocent and naive, and we read as she slowly gets pulled deeper into the web of the evil Charles Dalamar. Rose Somerset is probably the weakest character. She only shows up in the final third of the game, and her main role in the plot is just to help Emma realize that Charles is bad news. It's notable that we don't even learn what happened with Rose in this game. We just work to save Emma's spirit. In her final entry, which is Emma's ghost talking to us directly, Emma herself didn't even seem to care at all about what Charles did to Rose, which is incredibly strange, especially with what we learn in the later entries. Charles Dalamar is a great villain, and there's some good foreshadowing that he's evil and stuff, like him freaking out over Emma leaving England and creepily observing her from the door in her one journal illustration. It's not like high quality foreshadowing on the level of something like Edgar Wright's Cornetto trilogy of films, but for a casual PC hidden object game, it's pretty well done. I love how they even included lines explaining how Charles is the one who built all the strange locks on doors, and how Charles has been collecting all sorts of weird items in the manor. They actually bothered to give an explanation for why there's so many weird items scattered about in a hidden object game. Can you believe it? Another notable aspect of this game's story is that it's a horror story. While there are a few creepy moments in the other MCFs like the Huntsville Cemetery or the abandoned hospital and Prime Suspects, all of Ravenhearst is designed to be scary. Well, at least as scary as an E10+ rating allows. I'm still not sure how the heck a deranged Charles grabbing onto Emma with an axe clearly about to chop her up counts as just mild violence to the ESRB, but I guess it does somehow. But this game went for a horror feel, and because of that, nearly every single MCF game in the whole series to this very day is dealing with either a horror or at least a paranormal force in some way. It was thanks to Ravenhearst's success that this set the trend for how stories in the whole MCF series would go. I think, though, the strongest level within this game is the final level. It's a bit disappointing that there were only 19 regular levels compared to Prime Suspect's 21, but I like Ravenhearst's final level a lot more than the simple find and open the gem box level. A cool horror element is present in this level, where throughout the game you hear Emma's ghost give comments to the point that a player would probably be used to all the lines by the end. However, in level 20 there are some unique lines that Emma only says in this level.
No one leaves. Let me out.
But not only that, there are also some lines for Charles himself, which are only heard in the final level too.
That's not yours.
These lines are really able to throw a player off guard because they expect to only hear Emma, and it creates tension, like Charles's ghost is catching on to what we're doing and will soon stop us and do God knows what with us. The other reason why this level's my favorite in the game is the goal of finding 7 keys to open the door in the cellar. Every single hidden object scene within the game was designed to have a key hidden somewhere within it. Yet you never have to find a key as an object in the first 19 levels' item lists. So it's an actual test on the player's knowledge of locations if they can remember where the heck they saw the keys. They even throw in some decoy locations which show up as areas to look but have had their keys removed for the final level. And the genius of this design is that when a player goes back and replays Ravenhearst again, they now know to look for the keys in all the locations, so it slightly changes how a player approaches the game. Unlike Prime Suspects, whose gem box solution is always the same, the cellar's door puzzle has a pool of many 7-letter words that can show up, so it still takes some more brain power to solve the puzzle on repeat playthroughs. And if you're skilled enough to figure out the word before learning all 7 letters, then you can solve it faster. After solving the puzzle, the cellar door opens and you see the coffin, which you can open to free Emma's spirit and win the game. Let me tell you something though, the sight of that skeletal version of Emma Ravenhearst really messed up my 6-year-old self when I first played this game. I was already pretty spooked from hearing Charles speak for the first time in the weird, creepy voice in the final level, but what really sent me over the edge was the very obvious in hindsight jump scare of the skeleton in the coffin. I distinctly remember having recurring nightmares after finishing Ravenhearst for the first time, where I dreamed that Emma was playing the piano in the living room when Charles would throw a wedding ring into the room and shout in his scary voice, "Remember my memory," and then I would wake up. I can still remember the dream all these years later, and in hindsight, it doesn't even make much sense. But that legit terrified me when I was younger, and because of that, I didn't want to go back to replay Ravenhearst at all. My first time through Huntsville and Prime Suspects, I wanted to replay them again pretty much immediately after the first time beating them. But with Ravenhearst, it took me a few years before I even wanted to touch it again. Even to this day, I don't feel the urge to replay Ravenhearst nearly as much as I do for the other Classic Era MCFs. I love it, and I think it's a great entry in the series. And hopefully the 2,105 words I've written about Ravenhearst for this script proves it. It's not even like I was traumatized by that event. I think it's because during those few formative years, I didn't replay the game and therefore didn't develop nearly as strong of a nostalgic bond to it like I felt with the other games that I'd replay over and over again. In fact, it was only thanks to my love for replaying Huntsville and Prime Suspects that I even wanted to give the fourth MCF game a chance. And if the fourth game wasn't good or scared me too much like Ravenhearst did, then I probably would have totally given up on following the MCF series. So it's a very good thing, both for my love of MCF and for the good of my YouTube channel, that the next game in the series was Madame Fate. Madame Fate featured so many good expansions and improvements on the Classic Era formula, and all these innovations really wowed my 7-year-old self, so for the past 18 years, Madame Fate has been my favorite MCF game. And I'm not trying to give any offense to any future games in the series, but I really don't think any of them will ever top Madame Fate in my eyes. First of all, there's the boost in graphical quality. They experimented a bit in Ravenhearst, having animations such as the TV with static in the surveillance room, but there's a ton more animations in Madame Fate, with pretty much every location having some sort of decorative animation in it. Whether that's clouds blowing in the sky, lights flickering on carnival rides, or even birds pecking at spoiled food. These animations all help to make the hidden object scenes feel more dynamic and makes the carnival feel a whole lot more alive compared to the earlier game settings. This also helps boost the game's immersion, because a person at a real carnival is meant to be enticed by the bright flashing lights and visual effects, same as how a player playing this game is meant to be drawn in by the same thing. You hear the screams of excited fans on distant rides, you hear the electric hum of lights in some scenes. In the entry, you even hear a carny worker shouting for people to come and see the attractions. And for this game's soundtrack, all the songs sound like an old-fashioned pipe organ playing them, which works great for selling the feel of being at a carnival. Fate's Carnival is designed to be roughly the same level of rundown as the rooms of Ravenhearst Manor. They help to give off the impression that Fate's Carnival has been in decline for a long time. Holes have formed in the rocket ride vehicle because it's so old. The bumper cars are pretty much completely wrecked and unusable in the game. And there's even a chalk outline of a dead body at the entrance to the park. Many of the carnies reflect this decline too. It's almost like their better days are behind them, but they pretty much have to keep working at the carnival because they're desperate to make things work and they got nowhere else to be. Lance Pierceman has cuts and bandages all over him. Puddles is an alcoholic who seems totally miserable. Art the Carney has totally fallen off since the events of Prime Suspects and is pretty much a perfect anti-smoking PSA without saying a word about don't smoke, kids. Showing all this decline was the most apt way to depict a carnival, because even back in 2007, real-life traveling carnivals were well on the way out, and nowadays there's almost none. I love how much effort they put in this game to make it feel like fall too. There's leaves falling from the trees in several locations, even on the game's title screen. The Madame Fate map has a lot of autumn brown colors on it. And I love scenes like the rocket ride and gypsy wagon, where the sky is a sort of hazy orangish blue because of the angle the sun sets during fall. Since they set this game at evening, it allowed them to have a wide variety of times a day for the hidden object scenes to give them more visual variety. And by having so many different times shown in the game, it helps make the scenes feel more memorable due to their unique aesthetics compared to some of the earlier game scenes. Back when I first played this game, I immediately started to compare real-life sunsets to Madame Fate locations. Like, I would see one at the end of dusk, and I would say, oh, that reminds me of the photo booth. And even to this day, I'll occasionally do that, especially around October and November. The next big improvement Madame Fate made was with the hidden object scenes and puzzles. Just like how Ravenhearst gives you lots of rooms you'd expect to find in a mansion, Madame Fate gives all sorts of unique scenes of locations you'd expect to find in a carnival. The only real notable omission is a scene based in the Ferris wheel, which is very strange to me. One shows up on the map and appears in several other scenes' backgrounds, and a Ferris wheel is one of the most iconic carnival rides there is, if not the most iconic. So I don't get why they didn't make one for this game. Maybe they just ran out of time. In this game, they introduce interior hidden object scenes where you simply click on a part of a scene and then you have a whole other interior scene to play. To make these stand out, they have unique puzzles where you need to interact with elements within the scene. And it's a good thing they put these puzzles in because they help compensate for the more basic look of these scenes, which generally don't have decorative animations like the exterior scenes. The only one that sticks out is the inside of the clown's trailer, which has no puzzle interactions and doesn't have a more zoomed in look to it like the other ones. It feels more like an exterior scene they just repurposed to be an interior one for some reason. The other major type of hidden object scene they added were the carny hidden object scenes. With these, you get a nice character artwork of a carny filled with a ton of various item types. I love how each one generally has items specifically themed around the carny, like letters corresponding to what their name is, or in the case of Lance the Sword Swallower, having you find sharp objects like darts, scissors, and nails. A fantastic quality of life improvement in this game is that for the first time in the series you can collect multiple items at once. You didn't need to wait for an item's animation to complete like the older games. Now, if they hadn't put this feature in, then these carny scenes would be especially annoying to complete and be not really fun at all. But since it's in, it works great, and it's very cathartic to speed through and click on all the items in a super fast pace in the carny scenes. The other cool element they added in this game is morphing objects, where in almost every single scene, an object is morphing between two different images. And these are generally related to each other, but sometimes they aren't. Like, I don't get why on the carousel a bone and a spoon are morphing to one another. I don't think there's any connection between a bone and a spoon. But these morphing objects would go on to be used in a ton of future entries in the MCF series. The minor reward to finding these morphing objects is you get a hint replenished when you find one, but that's not that good of a reward. However, the major reward more than makes up for it. If you collect enough morphing objects, you permanently unlock new hidden object scenes in the game. And this is such a great concept, a bonus side mission in the game, which allows you to have more variety and encourages replayability for the game, either to find all the morphing objects you missed the first time, or to experience the full game with the new scenes unlocked. You get time bonuses for every single item you find in these morphing object unlock scenes, and this, along with your relaxed time mode you can choose and the other time bonuses for collecting 3 items in a row, mean that time constraints really aren't an issue anymore. It's a far cry from how strict the time was back in Huntsville. And I love, though, with the morphing objects, the classical MCF humor moment that by collecting them all, your big reward is unlocking the outhouse of all scenes. The most glamorous location in the carnival. Puzzles saw a similar improvement in this game. To unlock each of the Carney hidden object scenes, there's various word puzzles to solve. And they do a good job making these feel fresh, even though you do dozens of them over the course of the game. There's 5 different puzzle types, and they made sure to deliberately design the Carney scenes so you will almost never play the same puzzle in back-to-back levels. There's also a large pool of possible words that can spawn in each of the puzzles, making it unlikely you'll get duplicates within a single playthrough. In Madame Fate, they also have unique puzzles similar to Ravenhearst's door puzzles, but this time they put them at the end of each level, which is a far better place for them because they help make sure each level ends on a higher point than the earlier game's final puzzles did. A notable difference with Madame Fate's bigger puzzles, though, is that there's far fewer that could be considered Rube Goldberg-esque puzzles, where you're interacting with items. It would have been nice to have more of these, especially since my favorite by far in this game is the Tattooed Man's puzzle, which is a really good Rube Goldberg style puzzle. But I suppose they felt these puzzles were kind of redundant to have a ton of in this game, since the interior scenes have you move objects around in ways that are reminiscent of the Rube Goldberg puzzles anyway. Now, despite all these great improvements, it does feel like they were under some more time constraints and had to make some compromises to get the game out on time. There are only 15 levels this time around, which is a lot less than Prime Suspects and Ravenhearst had. And while I love the 15 levels we got, it would have been great to see even more. You know, just for spitballing ideas for 5 additional Carnies to investigate, they could have had a fire breather, a stilt walker, a sharpshooter, an elephant trainer, and a ventriloquist to go with the puppet show. The locations in this game have you find 10 items in each hidden object scene, while past games had just 8. So I feel like this was to compensate some for the smaller level count so that the levels would take longer and make the game feel more large. Speaking of the locations, they did a much worse job balancing out the hidden object scene appearances, with many that only appear once in the whole game. The Trunk in the Clown's trailer, Fabiano, Lance, the fish tank in the Ringmaster's tent, Tabitha, the stove in the pie-eating contest, the interior of the Clown's trailer, the tackle box in the Ringmaster's tent, the photo shack, and Dante the Tattooed Man. 10 hidden object scenes, 11 if you count the pig pen, which only shows up once as long as you've unlocked the Kitty Carnival. And some of these one-time only scenes are particularly egregious to me, like how Fabiano, Lance, Tabitha, and Dante are Carnies which only have their scenes appear once, while other Carnies get 3 or 4 appearances in the game. Or how the Clown's trailer trunk only appears once on level 3 and never again for the remaining 80% of the game. The thing that irks me the most, though, is that 3 of the carnies didn't get any hidden object scenes made for them. The contortionist, the ringmaster, and the acrobats don't have a carny scene like the other 12. It's a shame because clearly they had made the character art for the game because they show up in the attractions page, but they didn't take the time to put him into a larger scene and add some hidden object images on top of it. When 7-year-old me first played this game, I legit just thought it was a glitch, that they weren't showing up properly or something, but no, they just never made them. For most of the levels, the formula is always, here's a new hidden object scene based on the level carny, which seems to be what they intended to go for the game, but the absence of these 3 really sticks out to me. And then there's the relative lack of polish found in this game compared to some of the other Classic Era games. There's a ton of minor glitches and issues I noticed with this one. For example, every level has an interior scene except for level 6, even though it would have been a perfect spot to use the trunk and the clown's trailer again. If you get a time bonus by collecting 3 items in a row, then that makes the background audio mute for that location. I guess they didn't have enough audio tracks available in this game.
Good.
When you collect the final items, you're able to quickly weave to the map screen to skip the pop-up and just stare at an empty map, which wasn't an issue in the other games because they made sure that you would either have an option to go to the crime computer or be forced into the final puzzle in the case of Ravenhearst. Even though Ravenhearst had a serialized story revealed across the whole game, Madame Fate went back to a much more simpler story. Last game, the Master Detective got the case from the Queen of England herself, but in this game we get the case from the owner of a rundown carnival. Madame Fate has seen her own death in the crystal ball, and the Master Detective has to investigate all the carnies to determine who will kill her. Wow, this is a very cool premise for the story. I don't really like the ending. But before we get to that, let me talk about the positives. Madame Fate's a great character. 99% of the voice lines in the game are from her, so they really needed to have good execution on her, and they pulled it off with flying colors. Her design as a mystical fortune teller is great, and something that adds to the mystery is we only ever see her in her trailer by her crystal ball. We don't see her in any other location, and we don't even see what her face looks like under the veil. Even on the title screen of the game, we can see her silhouette in the trailer watching us, like she sees everything. And a small thing I like is that black cat she has accompany her, and how they put in the detail that it'll hiss at you if you click on it.
Greetings, Master Detective, and welcome to my carnival. You shall know me.
Just like how Emma's ghost will periodically give eerie lines in Ravenhearst, Madame Fate will often speak to the Master Detective, but Madame Fate is way more talkative. She'll not only give comments periodically, if you do good enough to collect a time bonus, she'll compliment you. However, on the flip side, if you miss quick enough, she'll scold you. This helps create a sense that she can see everything the player's doing through her ball of fate. I'm not sure how she talks with us, maybe through the Ball of Fate itself too, or maybe she's actually sticking around whispering in the Master Detective's ear as they walk around the whole carnival. I don't know. But I just love Madame Fate's personality. She manages to exude a sense of exotic mystery while at the same time saying some really funny lines. My favorite lines from her are,
You are not in Huntsville anymore.
when you misclick a ton, and
How could they not love Madame Fate?
there's a lot of morbid humor in this story, probably the most the series has ever or will ever have. Every single one of the carnies turn out to be set to die at midnight, and over the course of the game you come to realize that Madame Fate is far from a good person, and it's perfectly understandable why every single person at the carnival hates her. She sees the imminent demise of every single employee, and yet her only reaction is to make jokes and laugh about it. She doesn't ever try to feel bad or warn them or anything. She doesn't even care when she sees the death of her own son Franco. And when viewing the futures of the strongman and the ringmaster, she mentions that a mysterious someone will sabotage them and cause them to die. I always interpreted this as an implication the someone is Madame Fate herself, directly responsible for killing him. Given her personality and how she admits to poisoning Tabitha's lion, it's not a stretch at all to think that she had a direct influence in some of the carnies' deaths. It's pretty funny in retrospect how my 6-year-old self got terrified of Ravenhearst, but my 7-year-old self wasn't scared of Madame Fate at all. I suppose it's just that while there's a ton of deaths in this game, they aren't taken seriously. Thanks to Madame Fate's jokes, even stuff like Tabitha being eaten alive by a lion, or Puddles blowing his brains out didn't seem that frightening to me. I enjoy the level-to-level story of the game, even if it doesn't have an overarching narrative like Ravenhearst. But then we get to the ending. Madame Fate reveals it wasn't any of the carnies, but the Master Detective himself that caused her death by luring the spirit of Charles Dalmar to the carnival. We do a final puzzle which reveals an image of Ravenhearst, and Madame Fate then lies dead, killed by Charles. Charles then explains that while we freed Emma from Ravenhearst Manor, we'll never save his true love, Rose. The Master Detective then gets a call from the Queen, who says that Charles was also freed from Ravenhearst, to which the Master Detective responds with, "Your Majesty, I know." Then Charles approaches the phone booth, we hear the Master Detective scream, and then get a to-be-continued message along with a funny joke. So let me go through the things I take issue with at this game's ending, in order from minor to major. First, the iconic red telephone booth scene at the ending. Fate's Carnival looks to be built in a random field in the middle of nowhere, so I have no idea why there would be a phone booth right there. But also, given that the type of phone booth is so clearly associated with the UK, plus the Queen herself is calling on it, and Charles managed to make his way to the carnival, indicates that the whole game is set in the UK. But outside of the ending, there's not really any other supporting evidence that it's in the UK. American dollars are found in several of the locations, and in Fabiano's trailer there's even an American flag. Madame Fate doesn't even sound British at all with her accent, though I suppose it could be explained as her just faking an accent to sound more mysterious and exotic. Next, there's the fact that the Master Detective talks. From the start of the series, the Master Detective is meant to be whoever the person playing the game is. And it really affected the immersion of 7-year-old me and weirded me out to hear a woman's voice. I get it, the audience for PC hidden object games probably heavily skews toward women, so that's why they chose a woman's voice. But to be honest, the scene doesn't even need the master detective to be talking or screaming at all. It would have worked just as well if the master detective didn't talk and the queen just spoke to a silent master detective in the cutscene. There's admittedly some really good build-up of Charles as a villain in this ending. It was kinda weird that nothing really happened with Charles during Ravenhearst besides briefly having a chance to hear his voice in the final level. That implies it's likely that even when they were making Ravenhearst, they were planning on doing a sequel at some point to bring Charles back. But by having Charles show up at the end of this game, it's essentially hijacking Madame Fate's story for the sake of continuing Ravenhearst. On its own, this game's story isn't satisfying as a conclusion at all. Madame Fate's dead, the Carnies are dead, the Master Detective's fate is uncertain given the scream, and that's it. It's even less satisfying if a player didn't play Ravenhearst before Madame Fate, so they'd have no idea who the heck Charles even is and why he's showing up here in this game. There wasn't any proper foreshadowing in the game that it would turn out to be Charles at the end. If you go to the very end of the help pages, you see a small part of Charles peeking out from behind the MCF badge, but until you see the actual ending of the game, you aren't even gonna know that's Charles, since he looks totally different from how he was depicted in Emma's diary. In the ticket booth at the entrance, you can see Emma Ravenhearst's signature, but that just seems to be more of a reused asset, since it makes no sense at all for the carnival to have the signature of a woman who had been dead for over a century prior. And finally, in the ball puzzle for Tabitha the Lion Tamer, you can see the Raven from Ravenhearst title screen in the corner. Now, that might actually be intended to be a subtle hint toward the ending, but it would be just as logical to assume that they just threw it in as a little Easter egg. The biggest flaw with the ending being like this is that it means the entire 15 levels in the game were pointless to the narrative. Investigating all over the carnival, collecting hundreds of items, gazing into the crystal ball to view the future of each carny, all of it was essentially a waste of time, since none of them had anything to do with Madame Fate's death, and Charles was always going to arrive at the carnival by midnight anyway, no matter what the Master Detective did in the hours leading up to midnight. With Prime Suspects and MillionHeir, there's a clear point to how they frame the game with having suspects, because one of them at random turns out to be the culprit. It makes sense to go through and investigate the whole list of suspects, because every single one of them has an equal chance of being the culprit. And they each share an equal impact on the overall narrative. With Madame Fate, there's not a point to be investigating any suspects, because not a single one of them will ever really be guilty. And then there's all the other oddities with the plot that this game never explains. At the end of Ravenhearst, the message teasing the next game is that we've gained the trust of the Crown Princes of Europe who will no doubt seek our help in the future or the past. But this doesn't fit at all with what Madame Fate turned out to be, unless Madame Fate happens to secretly be a crown princess of Europe. I don't think she is. The last line about the future or the past implies some sort of time travel related story, which maybe they had an idea for but then scrapped, even though on the title screen Madame Fate's sign says past, present, and future. She never uses the Ball of Fate to look into the past. It wouldn't have even been that hard to show the past in this game. All they would have needed to do is reuse a scene from a past game during the intro cutscene and show it in the ball. Heck, why not show Ravenhearst in the opening to be a subtle hint towards the game ending with a Ravenhearst connection? And then the fact that 15 different carnies, well 16 if you count the acrobats as two separate people, as well as Madame Fate, are all set to die at midnight on the same day, each in their own unique method of death, except for the acrobats, is such an astronomically unlikely coincidence that even Lee O'Ryan wouldn't be able to see it. Oh wait, we aren't to MillionHeir yet, but we'll get there soon. Maybe it was meant to be some sort of curse that Charles brought upon the carnival, which caused them all to die at the same time, but that's not explained at all in this game. Heck, we don't even know for sure how Charles kills Madame Fate in this game, even though we see her dead. Maybe she just died of a heart attack in terror at seeing Charles enter her trailer. Since she was expecting her death, maybe it was meant to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But for that matter, why the heck doesn't Charles just kill the Master Detective, since he's so close to us in both the trailer and in the phone booth? In Return to Ravenhearst, it seems like the Master Detective got away completely unscathed. Maybe the explanation is that Charles didn't have enough energy in him to kill both Madame Fate and us. But that really diminishes Charles as a threatening villain, if that's the case. Probably the weirdest part of the story is that the Master Detective doesn't try to warn the carnies about their imminent demise. Madame Fate wouldn't care about preventing their deaths at all, that makes perfect sense. But the Master Detective absolutely would. Even at this early point in the series, it's very clear the Master Detective is firmly on the side of good and wanting to solve mysteries to help people both living and dead. Yet in this game, they learn about the people's upcoming deaths and do nothing to prevent them. Not even something like, "Oh hey Lucy, I'm back to investigate you again. Oh, by the way, why don't you forget about shaving tonight?" And there isn't even the explanation that the Master Detective is mute and can't say anything, because they gave the Master Detective a voice in this game's ending. But do you know what the beauty of Madame Fate is? The elements it added or improved to the series more than makes up for any flaws I think the story has. It's only because I love this game so much and have played it so often over the years that I notice a lot more of its issues compared to some of the other MCF games. And I hope it's clear that I love this game the most, but I think you can kinda tell given how much longer the Madame Fate section of this video is compared to the other games sections. So to conclude this game, I'd like to talk about how I feel it could use a remaster the most out of any MCF game. I feel you notice the 800 by 600 resolution a lot more in Madame Fate. They made the scenes much more detailed with smaller objects than there were in the earlier games, but this means that some of them look a lot more pixelated as well. While I love the visual effects in Madame Fate scenes, some of them look really simple and haven't aged very well. For example, the string of lights on the title screen, which is just a 2-frame animation, or the flags on the tents in the bumper car area don't look very good either. Also an impact of the low resolution is that they make some really funny text jokes in some of the scenes, but since it's so small, it's hard to even read or appreciate them. In the entrance, there's a box of liquor bottles from Booze World with a note that says, "Please move to Clown Trailer." In the outhouse, there are messages written for a good time call Lance and for a good time call Marlena. But because of how pixelated the game's screen is, it's not that easy to make this text out. A remaster could really help elevate these visual aspects. Plus, it could be a chance to polish up the game and fix some of its other minor flaws. Maybe even finally give the contortionist, ringmaster, and acrobats proper hidden object scenes. There's just a few problems with this fantasy, though. I have absolutely no idea what studio would even handle this sort of remaster. There might be some issues with licensing the stock images they used, and if they wanted to upscale them to a higher resolution, they'd probably just use AI instead of putting in the effort themselves. I very much doubt a classic game with a huge emphasis on hidden object scenes like Madame Fate would even sell as well in this day and age compared to when it came out. And who the heck knows if the original source code and assets even still exist. But I just love Madame Fate, and I would love to see an even better version of it. But on that note, we leave the main MCF series on a cliffhanger, wondering what will happen when we return to Ravenhearst. But before I end this video, I want to discuss the two spin-off games which are released after Madame Fate. One of which was a great entry in the series that stands right alongside the other Classic Era entries and is still very fun to replay to this day, and the other which is pretty much the exact opposite of that. So let's go with the opposite one first. The first spin-off the series ever had was Mystery Case Files Agent X. Now, I'm not going to be able to discuss much about this game, because there's barely any info about it nowadays. They decided to make it for Java cell phones, which I suppose were fairly common in 2008, but even back then they were rapidly becoming outclassed by the rise of the iPhone. And so the full game of Agent X has become lost media, with a demo of the first level being the only thing that survived to this day. Apparently the way it worked was that you would download a new mission every week with 24 total levels planned for the game. The plot is that the head of the MCF agency, Dr. Flint, is sending the master detective around the world to investigate cases, accompanied by a fellow MCF agent named Chloe. They actually made unique artwork for the characters, and I assume that means that every single one of the levels would have had at least one new character with artwork to meet and interact with, maybe even more than one. But it's crazy to me how many great lore elements were wasted on this phone game. Meeting other MCF agents besides just the master detective, learning about the MCF agency hierarchy, and meeting the MCF agency's leader. These are plot elements that the main PC series wouldn't even try to explore until over a decade after this game came out. Imagine if they had put this plot in a PC game back then. Wouldn't that have been amazing? And heck, the concept of an MCF game with such a massive scale it spans the entire globe is something we've never seen in the main series. But the problem is they weren't even able to follow up on this game's big ideas in a future mainline MCF game because it was squandered on a spin-off game on a phone that was rapidly becoming obsolete from the day the game launched. I just can't help but feel that Big Fish backed the wrong horse by having Agent X be on Java phones. For one thing, those phone screens were tiny and would be absolutely terrible to try to find hidden objects on. This is the full-size screenshot, but looking at it on a real phone, it would have looked more like this size. Instead of being able to click on the object when you find them, you would have to use the phone's directional buttons to navigate a cursor. Because it's on a pretty weak phone, that means that the scenes have to be much smaller size than the PC games with fewer items. And the kicker is that this game came out in April 2008. Just 3 months later, the Apple App Store opened up. Imagine if Big Fish had gotten in on the trend of App Store gaming right away from the get-go. Heck, maybe nowadays people would be talking about MCF Agent X the same way they talk about classic apps like Doodle Jump or Angry Birds. Okay, maybe MCF wouldn't have gotten quite that famous, but I guarantee if they had made it for the App Store, it would have sold better, lasted longer before becoming unplayable, and we would have at least probably had a lot more information about the game. It's sad because there was clearly a decent amount of effort put into this game, but it's gone to total waste since the game wasn't ever preserved, and it's very unlikely we'll ever see more from it, unless someone somewhere has a 17-plus-year-old phone stored away that is still in working order, has the full game downloaded onto it, and the person knows how to share the game files from it online. But I really doubt that'll happen. That's probably the biggest mystery in the whole series, is what Agent X was like. But on the flip side of Agent X, there's MillionHeir, a full-fledged original MCF game developed for the Nintendo DS, and actually published by Nintendo themselves. I guess back in the day Nintendo were willing to publish a lot more third-party games. I don't know. Unlike Agent X, this game had a lot more involvement from the PC game developers. And what I love about MillionHeir is that it's basically a combination of elements from many of the other Classic Era MCF games. First off, it brings back Suspects again, but the art style is much more similar to Prime Suspects characters than it is Madame Fate's. In fact, the tone of the game in general harkens back more to Huntsville and Prime Suspects. It's the only MCF game post-Ravenhearst to not have anything supernatural at all going on in its plot. The story of the game is pretty simple. The millionaire Phil T. Rich has been kidnapped, and the master detective has to investigate 12 different suspects to both determine who the person who kidnapped Phil is, as well as the identity of the person who will inherit Phil's money, the titular MillionHeir. What a great pun. In this game, the crime computer is actually self-aware with a personality of its own. Now maybe the end-of-level text briefings from Huntsville and Prime Suspects were actually the crime computer talking to the master detective, but I always thought they were just transmissions from the MCF agency itself. So maybe the crime computer's always been sentient, but it was this game that really explored the aspect. The game also dials up the humor considerably, probably to appeal to the more child-friendly DS audience. While there were some puns with characters in Prime Suspects, in MillionHeir pretty much every character has a pun name. Though I still to this day don't understand what Alba Noir's pun is. Each of them also has a secret they're hiding, most of which are humorous. Just like Prime Suspects, it's randomized which ones are innocent or potentially guilty. Half of the suspects are randomly selected to be potential heirs you investigate in the second part of the game, while the other half of suspects you investigate in the third part of the game to determine if they're the villain. In the third part, you also discover secrets each suspect has, which are generally quite funny. But since only 6 out of the 12 suspects are part of the last section to investigate them, that means you're encouraged to replay the game to find out all the secrets from the other suspects. For the first time in the series, the suspects we investigate each have their own lines and personality, and they made a mountain of unique text for this game. Each suspect has unique dialogue with the master detective when you first investigate him, dialogue for when you're investigating if they're the heir, dialogue for when you're investigating if they're the kidnapper, and each of the 12 also has unique dialogue for when they're the heir and when they're the kidnapper at the end. This helps boost the replayability even further, though there's one very confusing thing within this game's story. After investigating all 12 suspects for the first time, Alba Noir will tell us that Phil T. Rich's mansion would one day be rebuilt into a carnival of doom, referring to Fate's Carnival. Now there's quite a few reasons why this doesn't make any sense at all. Probably the biggest is I have no idea how a large mansion would get turned into a traveling circus made up of tents and trailers. Next, that implies that MillionHeir is actually a prequel to Madame Fate, but that factually can't be true, because the newspaper early in the game says that the detective has a history of success and clearly shows Madame Fate listed in the article. Well, maybe it's not exactly clear because of the DS's low resolution, but you get what I mean. Also, there's a Madame Fate fortune-telling booth in the game room location, so it's obvious that Fate's Carnival must already be a well-established attraction if they're able to have merchandising opportunities to promote the Madame Fate brand. By the way, I wonder if the model in the fortune-telling booth is actually meant to be an accurate depiction of what Madame Fate really looked like, at least maybe what she looked like in her youth, because she seems fairly old when we meet her in Madame Fate itself. Or maybe it's just a fake model they made to make Madame Fate seem more friendly and warm and welcoming. I don't know. There's a good amount of variety in the end-of-level puzzles in MillionHeir. Prime Suspects had 3, but this game has 4 during the initial investigation section. There's one where you slide the tiles to be correct, a spot the difference puzzle, a more traditional jigsaw puzzle, and rotating the bolts to make them all connect. They actually gave these puzzles a nice little difficulty curve. For example, in the bolt puzzle, the first time you have to rotate 9 of them with extra guides on the sides. The second time you have to rotate 9 again, this time without anything on the sides to help you. But, while the puzzles in the first phase of the game are great for keeping things fresh, the second phase puzzles are not. You do the same DNA sequencing phase for investigating all 6 of the potential heirs, and while they do make the later ones harder with more symbol types, the puzzle feels much worse than the earlier puzzles. I think a big component is just having to do so many of the same puzzle back to back, since the heir investigation section goes incredibly quickly. But the kicker is that there was a very easy solution to this issue of the puzzles being the same. Just use the DNA puzzle for 2 of the suspects, then bring back the other 4 puzzles again for 1 of each of the remaining suspects. Even though it's more of a mini game, I do still enjoy the DNA puzzle, just wish it was used a bit less. And to its credit, it's certainly better than the alleged puzzles in massive quotation marks of the third phase of the game. All these puzzles in massive quotation marks is sprinkling powder on an item from the suspect, blowing it off to show a fingerprint, then doing the world's easiest connect the dots puzzle. Once again, if they weren't able to implement more puzzles, why not just reuse earlier ones some more? But enough talk of the bad elements of the puzzles, and let's get back to good puzzles. There are 3 proper Rube Goldberg super puzzles in this game, 2 in your case file, and 1 on the door before the final treasure room. These are just as fun as the ones in Ravenhearst, though they make everything you can interact with sparkle, probably because otherwise it wouldn't be as clear with tapping on the tiny DS screen. However, to compensate for this, you can actually fail the puzzle if you don't tap the items in the correct order. So this helps the puzzles to at least have a little extra layer of complexity to them. And they're really fun, though once again, wish there was more of the good type of puzzles like that in the game. This game was built specifically for the DS, and it does a great job taking advantage of the DS's unique hardware. All the puzzles involve the touchscreen to move elements or rotate things. You need to use the microphone a few times, like for blowing fingerprint dust, or to use the super straw to affect a few scenes. There are many long images that are meant to be seen on top of each other, but the best use of the DS is how hidden object scenes are designed. On the bottom screen, you get a zoomed in portion of the scene that you can navigate either by tapping and dragging, pushing the letter buttons, or by the D-pad. There are many hidden objects that have some form of interaction to collect them, like slicing an apple, filling up an empty glass, or even drawing a line to connect 2 items together. On the top screen, you see the item list so it doesn't clutter up the area where you're actually looking for items. And you can also see the zoomed out image of the full hidden object scene on the top screen, either as half the screen, or you can temporarily minimize the item list to see the full thing. This helps ensure the player's always oriented and can see where they are in the zoomed in portion of the hidden object scene. It's even possible to search for items using the top screen too, but that seems, to me at least, to be an unnecessary extra challenge for the game. Yes, I suppose that if they had made this game for PC, they could reasonably keep most of its features intact, but this game being on the DS really helps it stand out from the other classic era counterparts, and it's fun to just have a game that changes up some elements. The scenes in MillionHeir are generally bright and colorful, harkening back to the art style of the scenes from Huntsville and Prime Suspects. Though several of the scenes implement animations to make them feel less static, these aren't used quite as often as they were in Madame Fate, and being on the DS, they don't look quite as good either, but still very nice. Just like Prime Suspects, some levels that have scenes which are dark and you need to find a battery in one of the other scenes to power your flashlight. But the flashlight radius in this game is much larger than it was in Prime Suspects, it taking up almost the entire bottom screen. Since most of the time you're finding items using the bottom screen anyway, I feel this makes the flashlight less effective as a mechanic to change up how you approach scenes compared to how it was in Prime Suspects. But I guess there is still at least the loss of the top screen. Instead of the scan-out ray device, you get the X-ray device, which doesn't need a battery in this game. This device can be used in pretty much every scene to find certain items, and they conveniently mark the items on the list with a little star if it needs a special tool so you don't get confused about what you can see right away and collect and what you need to use a tool to collect. What I like about the X-ray is they actually put some thought into what it affects in the scene. So if you point it at a metal object, it'll glow under the X-ray, and if you point it at an animal, you're able to see its skeleton. It really helps make the X-ray feel like a fun additional element to the game. The next tool in the Master Detective's arsenal is the swim goggles, which allow you to see underwater to find items that would otherwise be obscured, but these sadly are only used in a few hidden object scenes, whereas the X-ray device is used pretty much everywhere. And the final item you get for your arsenal is the super straw, which is also the most disappointing and used in even less scenes than the swim goggles. The super straw involves you blowing on your DS's microphone in order to affect a scene, but it could have been used a whole lot more. It makes me wonder if they had more planned for the super straw and swim goggles, but they didn't have a chance to implement it, or if they simply made them as an excuse to give the game slightly more variety. Just like Madame Fate, there are many locations which have interior scenes for you to investigate, and these often feature some form of unique gameplay from the larger scenes. For example, the TNT box in the mine has you finding bundles of similar items reminiscent of Madame Fate's Carney scenes, and the toolbox in Tiger Point Plaza has you drawing a line to connect two items based on a hint from the list. While the locations themselves aren't explicitly randomized in this, there still will be some variety in the scenes you visit. During the second phase, investigating potential errors, those 6 levels only have one scene each. The specific location related to that suspect. But during the third phase, investigating potential villains, you have longer levels whose locations are specifically tied to that suspect. For example, every time you investigate Lee O'Ryan as a villain, you visit the planetarium, dog suite, model train room, and abandoned bar for the locations. But if a playthrough doesn't have Lee O'Ryan as a villain, then you investigate a different set of locations with that suspect, perhaps not even seeing some of these 4 locations at all in the third phase. By the way, it was only when I was getting footage for the Lee O'Ryan example that I noticed that they actually put a bit of randomization in the map screen. The images all appear in roughly the same places, but there's slight variety in their positions. This happens on literally every single map screen in the game, even on screens where there is only one location and you have no need to ever actually visit the map on that level. I got no idea why they even bothered to do this, because it's such a niche thing that only an MCF super nerd like myself would even pick up on. But to the developer, whoever did this, I want to know that your work has been seen and appreciated, even if it took quite a few years for it. While my favorite map style is the overworld one seen in Huntsville, Prime Suspects, and Madame Fate, I do like the investigation board they went with in this game. Plus, you only ever visit 1 to 6 locations in a level, so it's not like the game even needed a larger map like the other games had. Overall though, MillionHeir is a very solid entry in the MCF series that stands on par with the other Classic Era games. MillionHeir clearly must have been a pretty successful title for the DS, since Big Fish would greenlight DS ports of Prime Suspects and Ravenhearst, as well as 3DS ports of Return to Ravenhearst, Dire Grove, and a second port of Ravenhearst. I don't know why they did ports for both consoles. And while these games are okay ports, they all suffer various downgrades, and some even have missing content compared to the PC versions. But most notable is that none of these ports of PC games utilize the DS or 3DS nearly as well as MillionHeir does. The most egregious absence is that the top screen doesn't show a zoomed out version of the hidden object scenes in these ports, which makes it a lot tougher to find objects since you are only ever able to see a small part of the scene at a time. MillionHeir feels like a perfect game to conclude the Classic Era. It took several elements that made the earlier games unique and combined them all into one great package. But while the team that made this was working to make a game similar to the ones that came before it in the series, the team working on the next PC game was instead looking to innovate heavily on the MCF formula. And oh boy, did they knock it out of the park. But this part is long enough as it is, lasting over an hour and 45 minutes, so I'll continue the retrospective in the next part, where I discuss what I consider to be the best era of MCF, the Golden Era. Like and subscribe if you want, and I'll see you for the next bonus video.